let me introduce our panel. Beside Tom is Deirdre Timmons, who is Sustainable Finance Director with PwC Ireland and is leading that whole change agenda for PwC clients and beyond. Beside her is Aisling Curtis, Director of Strategy and Sustainability with Microsoft. I was recently on another panel, a sporting panel, and there was someone who was a VP, a site leader in Ireland, and the footprint, you will all be aware if you go to Leopardstown of the massive Microsoft, but when you add that they owned LinkedIn as well, over 6,000 employees in Ireland are under the Microsoft banner. And by God, when it comes to our corporation tax receipts, is Pascal and the rest of us thankful to have them in Ireland. But of course, I don't know, what are we up to, Windows 12 is it now? But it's a new one every time. But we can't do without Microsoft. And in all this area, they not only are best in class in terms of ESG change, but they're obviously making a lot of companies a lot more compliant, productive and efficient by using their technology innovatively and applying it to their business. And last but not least, Caoimhe Donnelly is Chief Sustainability Officer with the CIE Group. Very interesting because it's a state company, a semi-state company, as opposed to responding to shareholders or partners. But for them, the whole sustainability and decarbonisation debate is great because public policy is moving people out of a car culture towards public transport. But secondly, I think apart from the Dart, all of their vehicles use fossil fuels at the moment, and obviously it's a huge challenge of change. So I'd like to start by giving an open invitation to our three other panelists, other than Tom, which we'll come back to. Deirdre, perhaps you could just tell us what PwC is doing for its clients to be compliant with ESG, and what leadership you yourself are giving in this area.
Okay, thanks, Ivan, and good morning, everybody. Yeah, you started off in your earlier comments, Ivan, by saying that this is a big challenge for organisations. And as you said, many of them just view this as a compliance cost. And so, you know, there's a range of different companies that we deal with and a range of different attitudes to ESG and whether it's a good or bad thing for their businesses. I suppose, you know, in terms of how we would advise firms who would be starting out in this agenda, we would very much say that leadership needs to come from the top. It should start with the CEO and trickle all the way down through the business. And when I say leadership should come from the top, I'm not talking about the rhetoric and what CEOs talk about and you know, when they're putting together maybe their financial reports and their sustainability reports, putting some commentary in there about what they're doing, but actually doing within their businesses, that bridging that say-do gap, as we refer to it. So it needs to come from there. And I'm sure my fellow panelists working as chief sustainability officers would agree with me in that regard, because you can have a chief sustainability officer in place, but unless the support comes from the board and the directors, that can be a very lonely place to be if you don't have that support. So I suppose maybe starting from there, we would work a lot with boards in terms of education and awareness, and in some cases trying to overcome resistance to why they should change. There's a lot of that as well. So part of what we would just to talk to them about is, you know, even if you don't see the risks and the opportunities within this, what you do need to see is that this is how the world is changing, and you have to change with it, because effectively you could run out of road here if you don't go with this agenda, and you could find yourself in a situation where you no longer have a license to operate, be that from civic society or be that from your financiers, for example, who no longer will be in a position to deal with you. And I mean, some of those are commercial decisions in themselves. If we talk about that access to finance piece, for example, shareholders are actively working with companies now and requiring a lot more disclosure from them, a lot more commitments from them, and indeed a lot more action around those commitments. We see banks are in a position now where EU regulations are forcing them to declare how they are lending and to what kind of activities they're lending. So there's pressure coming from that side of things as well. We've had a couple of companies call us in and say, our bank was in here recently talking to us about this, and is there a possibility that we may not get finance in the future? Yes, it's a very real possibility, and that's a very real commercial barrier if you no longer can access your finance. And even things like leasing, if you want to lease a fleet, all these financial services companies now are looking at how they are deploying their capital. So, leasing companies will start wanting to lease only EV vehicles eventually, etc. So, it's all very, very real. I think when you get the board on board, it's then trying to work through and understand how, if and how the strategy needs to change as a result, and work through that, understand what are the material risks to the business from ESG, try and quantify them financially so that you understand that impact as well. And work with stakeholders is very, very important in all of that. Understanding what your stakeholders require from the business going forward to allow you to continue to operate. And then...
Can I ask you, when a client comes to you, an existing client, and they say, look, I just want to be compliant with all these, do you have a kind of simple, you could say gender parity would be a big issue. Fair treatment, we'll say the living wage would be a social issue. What is your own carbon footprint in your company? What is your procurement policy as regards carbon footprint? Is there, because a lot of people, it tends to be quite top line and conceptual even.
Yes.
So, because you meet the real world, right? Because they're paying for you, right? So maybe explain to us the journey that you take clients on to say, for your business, this is what it means.
Well, I suppose it's interesting, Ivan, because some do come into us with that, oh, look, this is a compliance issue. We don't really want to do anything else. So we have to report on gender parity or whatever it might be. Just come in and help us with that. And we'd still have that conversation about, will you please go back and look at strategy? And even if they don't, by the time, a lot of the time that they work through a compliance process, they've tended to find they've gone back, they have to go back to strategy. Because it's once you start having to look through and collect data on some of these issues, and when you sit down and realize what it's going to look like when you report it, sometimes it makes you say, actually, that doesn't make us look so good. So now we need to see how we look at that. And once you start looking at some of these issues, it tends to have a bit of a snowball effect anyway. But I mean, in terms of a compliance process, there's a huge amount of regulations out there at the moment. As you said, all got their own different acronyms attached to them, which really doesn't help. You're absolutely right with that. So a lot of the work we would also do is in terms of regulation road mapping and trying to help a business understand what it is that they're going to have to do, what regulations apply to them, how they're going to have to report, and helping them step through that bit by bit, working through how you collect the data in order to report and right through to actually reporting on it. So, there's different projects.
Okay, and we will drill into these. Aisling Curtis, Microsoft. First of all, tell us your own ESG journey in relation to Microsoft, and what are the sort of key products and services that you're selling that help others to comply?
So Microsoft's been around sustainability and working to help understand, as you say, quite a complex issue for many years, in fact, nearly decades, in terms of the investment and approach that we've taken. So our journey, we've really approached it setting very ambitious goals. So we wanted to be, from a carbon point of view, carbon negative by 2030. We want to remove the equivalent carbon of our emissions since 1975. So removing historical emissions is really significant from an ESG goal point of view. And we're making good progress with that. We don't want to stop just in terms of carbon, but also we want to be water positive and zero waste as well. And again, we're making good progress with this. One of the things that we've learned, and it's a little bit, as Deirdre was saying there, the importance of transparency and really taking the opportunity to learn from each other, because this isn't a journey that is actually linear in its nature. We're going to learn, we're going to make progress. Some of the issues will take a step back. We need to learn from each other and create that sort of environment. Critical, as Tom was saying, in terms of the leadership that we are ensuring that is embedding across all organizations, and it is really across industry, cross company impact for the next number of years, and really, let's face it, across our planet.
So, from my limited understanding of tech and change, the big innovation of the last 5 years and going forward is the cloud.
Yes.
Which leads to data centers.
Yes, yeah.
Which are huge gas guzzlers of energy. So how have you dealt with the direct challenge of data centers, being inimical to what the sustainable goals are?
So the big thing with data centers is to take it into the perspective of if each business or organization had to run their own data center. You can imagine the amount of consumption and inefficiencies that we would have in that way. Cloud gives us economies of scale in that respect, and we are able to enable many organizations to do this in a way that's actually very sustainable going forward. So you can, and there's plenty of research to support this, you can make savings up to 93% in terms of the carbon footprint by using cloud and using data centers. But I suppose when you look at it in a wider context, we're actually able to push past some of those reliances on the energy consumption and usage and try different things. So for example, we would use outside water in terms of, outside air instead of water, which is then contributing to that water positive approach around data centers. And I think all of us as a collective need to think about how we can use that and actually use the technology and the green infrastructure to enable our businesses the best that we can for a sustainable future for all.
And under the S of ESG,
yes,
you've done quite a lot on diversity.
We have indeed, and we're very, very passionate. You probably saw some of the coverage yesterday about Dream Space, for instance, which is an immersive programme for school-going children, primary and secondary. And over the last 4 years, we invested 5 million actually into the Irish school immersive programme that we hold for Dream Space, and we're now investing a further 3 million over the next number of years to ensure that actually all primary and secondary school going children have access to this immersive STEM development programme. And over the last number of years, we've actually put through over 130,000 children through that programme, which is an excellent example of the S, where we're investing early at primary and secondary school. We also do a huge amount with universities and also in terms of STEM development and leadership, gender balance as an organisation as well.
Okay, Caoimhe Donnelly, Chief Sustainability Officer with CIE. Your shareholder is the Green Minister for Environment, Eamon Ryan. So you need to get your act together. What are you doing?
Yeah, so thank you, Ivan, and delighted to be here today. So, around 3 years ago, we looked at the changing world and the world of ESG, and really came together and said, Well, really, it's not about ESG, which is really around, risk management and compliance. Really, we need to look further down the line and see how can we deliver impact, and how can we not only grow and create value, but also deliver positive externalities. So essentially, we align to the SDGs and look to see how we can use our assets, our infrastructure, our people of over 11,000, and our property portfolio, and see how could we align that to both be climate friendly and also deliver social value. So we have our sustainability strategy that we have been working on over the last number of years, and really we see it as something which ensures that we are innovating for the future, as well as driving efficiencies and opportunity for the group in terms of modal shift, and also realigning and seeing how again we can use our property portfolio just to drive modal shift and deliver value within each of within urban areas. So what we are doing is we are working towards obviously decarbonising. We have to drive our carbon, reduce our carbon by 51% by 2030, carbon neutrality by 2050, and that is at the same time as growth. We're building our services to meet a population which in Ireland will reach 6 million by 2040. So it's a huge challenge. So we have to expand our services and also align our services to create modal shift, drive people out of their, not drive people out of their cars, but get onto a high quality public transport, but also reduce our emissions.
Oh, okay, and just in relation to it's an electric vehicle. So the simple solution to transport is electricity is going to move between solar and wind from 40% to 80%, and therefore going to electrify transport instead of burning fossil fuels. That's the deal. Okay, but with a heavy goods vehicle, a big bus, a big locomotive, it's more difficult because the technology. So how is the fleet conversion for electrification going, and where are we? And I think Deirdre's involved this year. How is hydrogen?
Yeah.
Where does that fit into the picture?
So, you've raised a very good point. So, unfortunately, it's not as simple as that. It's not just about electric vehicles, and convert the whole fleet over to electric vehicles. That works particularly for city buses and urban buses. But there are those longer distance vehicles which remain a question, and that's where we see the opportunities for hydrogen, and and why we have been working with stakeholders and trialing hydrogen buses in our bus air fleet, and also the Dublin bus fleet, and we have. We're part of a consortium, the Green or the Galway Hydrogen Hub, which is looking to create a hydrogen valley in the west of Ireland, which would create a fully fledged hydrogen supply chain where we can test, trial, and see if hydrogen does deliver the solution for those heavy duty vehicles, public transport, long distance public transport, shipping, aviation, etc., etc. There, like that with on the train side, on rail, the DAR Plus will obviously electrify commuter areas, and you can build and justify electrifying high density areas. But beyond that, into city, it becomes much more complex. So you can have various different efficiencies around hybrid engines and fuels, but that remains a big question. And
I think because there's a lot of cynicism about Metrolink, it's on, it's off, it's gone on for 40 years. But I think DART Plus is perhaps the most exciting, because this means for all commuter traffic into Dublin from Maynooth line and so on will all be electrified. Like I was speaking last week to TII and NTA and all those people, TFI and so on, that is the most tangible, immediate project there.
And well, it's not the most tangible. There are lots of, across all the companies, but it will electrify 80% of journeys on the rail network by 2027 or certainly by 2030, which is enormous.
Which is fantastic.
And a high volume, high speed, et cetera, et cetera.
Tom, if I could just revert to you, because you actually gave a brilliant global perspective, and if I may say so, a humanitarian perspective on life and all of this agenda, but you didn't mention the day job, Repak, the retail sector, plastic and all of that. Maybe you could tell us what the initiatives are and what's happening.
Yeah, thank you, Ivan. So I run a cash and carry group. They're family businesses all over the country, and many of them have less than 10 employees, 15 employees. So unlike my colleagues on the panel, we're not a very large organization. So how you explain and develop ESG and to an audience like that in the different parts of the country. I think one of the big things hitting us first of all in the cash and carry sector is that there is a great difficulty in getting good employees out there. The retail sector, the wholesale sector isn't a very exciting one. So to sustain yourself and to develop yourself, you actually have to make yourself more attractive. And the interesting thing is about Gen Zs and all that are coming from it is that they get ESG. They understand what it means. They're bought into it. So there is a lot of greenwashing out there, and people are saying we're doing X, Y, or Z. So to get yourself set up for that, you really have to look at what is it, the business you do. And it's a very simple business. We move boxes. We don't care what's in the boxes. We move boxes to hotels, restaurants, coffee shops, and retail outlets. So we have a very small set of metrics that we can, in terms of looking at the environment. We have energy, we've transport would be the big ones. So we have to look at the materiality of what they mean in the world out there. One of the fortunate things we have in the cash and carries are fairly big sheds around the place. So we have a big amount of space on the top for solar. So already we're starting that process of looking to see how we can move into solar. It is more difficult, as you said, with some of the vehicle movements in terms of some of the journeys we do around the country. And in many cases, apart from reps and vans on the road, for some of the bigger vehicles, it's hard yet to get into electric. And we're not there at that stage. Water is another big use in lots of areas. So we've literally started the roadmap of what is it we use and how we can reduce those. We're doing it partly because it's the right thing to do, but I would also have to say that we are going to lose contracts, particularly with the state, whether it's HSE or whether it's the prisons, the army, the Navy, and all the other places we deal with, unless we can show that we're on the road to ESG. That the government have, with all the procurement, whether it's in the legal field or whether it's in the financial field, are saying, unless you can prove to us that you're on the green journey, you can't apply for the tenders. Now, the government aren't there in many cases on their own place, but they're insisting that we do so. So part of it is out of necessity, and part of it is in the communities we live and work in. We can see the needs of those communities. We live where we work, so that gives us a huge advantage over some of the big
initiatives, because Repak, they're doing a great job. The whole question of excess, people buying things loose and less plastic, less packaging.
Absolutely.
And so on. Is there any progress to report?
Oh, there is. There's huge progress to report. And a lot of it starts at the planning stage. I mean, 80% of all the issues around the environmental issues start at the planning stage. So if you can get your planners, these are the people who make the product, if you can get them on board early so that you can get around some of the issues that we have on plastic and on others, you can actually save an awful lot of the issues that are developing. And we are very strongly working into this circular economy now, where we recycle, reuse, and to that extent. I mean, even in one of the big examples that people always bring up, and certainly in packaging, is PET bottles, whether it's Britvic or Coca-Cola or whatever. And now we're almost at the stage that 100% of all of those are recyclable. And we're getting to the stage that 50% of the product in the PET bottles has been recycled already. So that's a huge step change in the whole area of recycling and packaging. But we're also seeing a trend and pushing back to industry from the Repak's point of view of saying, you have to make sure you're going to take this back and fix it. So when I was young, and many people will remember that you got your television, you hired your television all of 40, 50 years ago from RTV Rentals. That's or somebody. Right. We're going to go back to that type of a society to some extent. So in 20 years' time, you'll probably never own your dishwasher or your fridge or your microwave. You'll have it out. And when it's broken, you bring it back and they give you a new one. So it's everything is being pushed back to producers to that extent and saying that's the way the economy will go. This disposable society that we've lived in for so long isn't sustainable. So it won't
be retail and distribution, it'll be back to manufacturers.
Absolutely back to manufacturers. And we're seeing that with cars, we're seeing it with lots of other ones.
That makes sense. Start at the beginning as well. Okay, the G, Deirdre. You spoke about yesteryear and RTV there. I remember when PwC were a numerous organisation. They did your accounts, they did your auditing, they told you what your P&L, what your balance sheet, your return on capital employed. What are the simple arithmetic, numerous metrics of governance? Could you speak to that in terms of when you're producing your annual report or you're doing, you're focusing on your strategy, what are the metrics? Because we're going to talk later about ratings and ESG matrices and so on. From your point of view, maybe you could just explain a bit of that.
Well, I suppose maybe it's not even necessarily around actual metrics, but I suppose understanding what the board's role, the CEO's role, and individuals' roles are within that organisation, and having that very, very clear. So a structure around that. It should be clear what the accountability is throughout the organisation. Things like whether there is pay-related incentives towards a lot of these sort of initiatives is also a big piece of that governance structure, whether that's there or not, because that can be important as well in terms of driving change. And I suppose, there's frameworks, for example, like the TCFD or the Task Force for Climate Related to Financial Disclosures, which would have a very clear governance piece around that. It's used quite a lot for climate-related reporting, but we see it coming in a lot of reporting now. And a lot of.
Let me ask you a very specific question then. SFDR is a term that keeps coming up throughout the day. Sustainable Finance Disclosure Reporting. Yeah. So reporting implies some sort of process. If you could describe that, what does that look like?
Well, SFDR is more on the investor side of things as opposed to the corporate side of things. So I think if we were looking at maybe CSRD, let's take another acronym. Yes. Corporate Sustainability Reporting Directive would be more applicable to the corporate side of things in that regard.
So what are the key components of that?
It will talk about the role of the board. It'll talk about as I say, that accountability piece. It'll talk about the strategy piece, what the company has identified as material risks to the business, what actions they are taking around those risks to the business, what targets and milestones and metrics they are putting in around managing those risks in the business. They would be kind of the key things that would come out under that particular element.
Okay, I'd like you, perhaps, Aisling, to talk a little bit more. It's an opportunity to sell Microsoft services here, okay? In terms of people in the room, what are the type of things that technology, whether it's AI, the Internet of Things, or GPS technology, or whatever you might be selling, and the integration of data, how that might be a good investment to make to this audience?
Okay, so in the context of what Deirdre outlined around some of the regulations that are coming down, it's going to be really imperative actually to understand your footprint, to use the data that you have and actually be able to use that to bring insights so that you're not just being able to report on sustainability topics, but you're actually able to act on it. So you're able to reduce, you're able to learn from other organizations or partner with organizations to understand that data. So for example, we've invested in a product called Cloud for Sustainability, okay? And it's a solution manager to understand, take your data from all sorts of sources to understand your situation currently from an ESG point of view. So in particular, for example, environmental, so your carbon footprint. We do this for ourselves. So we're able to tell how our scope 1 and our scope 2, so these are assets that we would own, how our carbon is going from that point of view. From a scope 3 point of view, which is the suppliers that we use, we know that we didn't make as much progress last year, and we are very, very transparent because we realize this is quite a complex issue and you do need to understand your progress, but also act and be agile and make changes going forward. So one of the things that we did in that instance, having used the reporting to understand it, was to actually be able to make change around the scope 3. So we updated our supplier conduct code, we updated the reporting, we made it more frequent, and then we actually had conversations with our leaders, as Deirdre is suggesting, to say, what can we do different? How can we make sure that we have access to that amount of data from our scope 3 suppliers, for instance? So the key thing that I would suggest is that it's not just about understanding it from a reporting point of view, and for sure solutions like our Cloud for Sustainability would help that. It is really about working in a strategic way to make those changes so that you're making sustainable changes across the whole organisation and bringing the organisation with you.
For CIE, Caoimhe, is it just about the environmental piece, or is there an S and a G for CIE?
Well, we have 3 pillars which we align to: economic, environmental, and social. And for us, we would see that actually, we are would like to think of ourselves as a group which is a bringing value and bringing impact essentially, and has both an economic and a social value. So our passengers, we're bringing them to and from work and to the workplace, and our connections are enabling thriving local economies and towns and communities. But for us, obviously the environmental aspect is huge. It's a critical aspect. But we also, as I mentioned earlier on, see that part of, say, what we're doing in terms of the economic and the social is around our property portfolio. So we are one of the biggest landholders in the country, and we could, as we have done in the past, just lease it out, property developers, et cetera, and not have the oversight. Now we have a strategy which is ensuring that any property development we have around Houston Station, Galway, Limerick is all aligned to enhance and drive the public green. It is to ensure that we have both residential and commercial property development and a provision for housing along that. In that, and also any development that we do will ensure that it is a very nice area with which is state of the art in terms of the public green. So those are some of that's an example of how we are using our assets to add
So
value.
it's almost a cultural approach to your assets.
Yeah.
Okay.
And actually, just to say that we are, also working with key property developers that have that as part of their offering.
Okay. Right. Final sort of question I want to put to anyone on the panel who wants to take it. It's a bit of a curveball question. So it strikes me that, you can clearly see the industries that are on the right side of ESG. So I do a lot of work within Wind Energy Ireland. They plan to build 7 gigawatts of offshore wind. They're on the side of the end. If I was working for Esso or Texaco or Circle K or some of those, I'd wonder. If I was working for a tobacco company, if I was working for DCC that has invested in a lot and made a fortune out of old economy investments, distribution, oil, fossil fuels, all of those. If I worked in the alcohol industry, clearly not, socially desirable. If I worked in the gambling industry, what do you say to people who are in the wrong side of ESG history? In other words, I'm trying to connect people who just make their livelihood, go to work, trying to do the best they can, rear their families and so on. What would you say, Deirdre?
Well, I suppose it is something that comes up an awful lot and has come up an awful lot in terms of the investment community, and it has been used to sort of poke holes in the ESG agenda as to why are investors still remaining with firms like that. And I think coming back to that point about driving change and so on, the ESG investment community is very, very instrumental in trying to drive that change by remaining invested as opposed to divesting. I mean, if you look at this, I think about 55% of European assets under management are in no way linked to ESG. So if you divest away from those companies, you're leaving it in the hands of those who effectively don't care. Whereas if you're a shareholder, you can use that influence to drive change and make those businesses shift towards a more sustainable business. So I think
just to use an example, if I was a cash and carry distributor, would I decide, you know what, and I'm using an example that isn't directly, we won't distribute peat briquettes because we think this is a smoky fuel and so on. Is that an interaction that you could actually decide we're not going to sell tobacco anymore? It
is a dilemma. Tobacco is unfortunately a big part of our business because most tobacco is sold at convenience level rather than you're not buying it in Tesco, you're buying it on the forecourt or you're buying it on the way home. So it's a dilemma, and it's an internal dilemma, I have to say. I have. My grandfather was a bookmaker, something that you know. So my education was paid for out of the gambling industry. So I have to be very careful with how I answer this, and probably also have to take it in time and look at the times
people who are well intentioned.
We have one or two of our members who don't sell, and it's on religious basis, don't sell alcohol in their cash and carries. So and have done so for many years. But it's something that I struggle with, I have to say, in terms of the other side of my life is seeing some of the things that are happening in life. And I do struggle at times with some of the products we sell. In terms of alcohol, I think there is a level of responsibility that's coming into that industry.
Yeah.
I think thankfully the cigarette industry, the tobacco industry is changing. They're getting out of a huge amount of the products they're in. There's still too many people smoking, and unfortunately there's still too many, and it's mostly young women who are the ones who are continuing to grow the numbers of in cigarettes. But it's an answer, Ivan, I don't have for you.
Okay.
In terms of what is the right thing to do.
Well, we've a minute and a bit left. I always say don't let the wrong question get in the way of the right answer. Before we wrap up, is there anything that you'd like to say that you weren't asked about, Kiva?
Well, it's just, I'd like to just add to that question. I think that, if you're on the wrong side, obviously, there are risks and opportunities, but it's also an opportunity for innovation and for long-term growth. You're protecting and setting out a pathway for long-term sustainability of the business. And so you have to get that into your mindset. And also, it's a real opportunity to invest in your people and your culture and unite them around a common purpose. And we've really, really felt that. You suddenly give a voice to those who might not necessarily have been seen or heard before. And through that comes innovation. So I think that is what I would say to companies who are on the wrong side.
Yes, Aisling.
I think there's a great opportunity, as you say, Caoimhe, from an innovation point of view, a leadership, which we have all talked about this morning, to actually make that change. And there's no greater urgency than all of what we spoke about this morning. And Tom very eloquently talked us through in his speech as well. So I think the time is now. There is an opportunity to innovate and make a difference for the next future and the next generation, let's face it.
All right, I'll draw a line under it there. I want to thank Tom, Deirdre, Kiva, and Aisling very much indeed. Please show your appreciation to our first panel. Okay.